So I guess I was really curious when I saw your video about the Obama birth certificate. And I'm like, wow, here's somebody talking about this who I haven't come across before. I don't know how many questions you want to answer, or if you will, but I am curious as to why you put this out when you did, and if it's something you were following for a long time, because you may know now, my paper's been following it from the very beginning. Well, from when we were incepted, we started it in 2009, but the issues, the questions existed long before that, actually, 2007. So when did you kind of get plugged into this?
Well, I think maybe to start, why don't each of us give a little bit of our background a little bit, just to
Okay,
put this in
sure,
context.
sure.
So I'll start. I'm Zach DiGregorio. Um, I'm an accountant. I'm a certified public accountant, and I've um, where where do I start here? So I've been an accountant for a long time,
Mhm.
and I'm also a government whistleblower. So a few years ago, I came forward with information about $250 million of fraud by the governor of New Mexico and her staff.
Oh,
Ever since I came forward with that information, my life has been turned upside down. That has turned into a massive lawsuit that has gone on for years. And for legal reasons, I cannot talk about anything regarding to the case. But that's kind of my story and my background. And I'm still an accountant. I've moved to Arizona. I live in Phoenix now. And this whole time, I've been doing YouTube. So I started my YouTube channel maybe like 8 years ago, and I've always done videos on accounting and finance. So every week, I would post a video about some kind of accounting or finance topic that's interesting to my audience that will help them save money. And I've been just growing a channel over the last 8 years. 6 months ago, I changed. I pivoted the kind of content on my channel to cover more current events and politics because of all the cases that were coming out against President Trump. So it drove me so nuts that we had such a clearly two-tiered justice system. And what was going on was so unfair to arrest, political opponents of the current administration that I couldn't make videos about accounting and business anymore without addressing the elephant in the room. Because business doesn't work without a court system. If there's no justice, if you can't go to court and take your business contracts to court, then there's no point in going on every week on YouTube and talking about accounting concepts because the whole system doesn't work anymore. If I was to give you business advice under a communist regime, the business advice would be to use all your money to pay for government bribes. It's not about creating the best product or working hard or building a business. It's all about corruption. And that's what's going on now. And so about 6 months ago, I changed my channel. I started covering all the court cases against Donald Trump, and really digging into some of the corruption, the financial aspects of things, what was really going on. And so the big thing that happened last month, which I'm sure you're aware of, is the Supreme Court of Colorado came out with a judgment kicking Donald Trump off the ballot in Colorado. And that was so unjust. It blew my mind. And so I'm getting ready to cover this Colorado verdict and all this stuff. And I'm starting to think, we're talking about being qualified to be on the ballot as a presidential candidate. Wasn't this a topic of discussion not that long ago? Wait a second. Didn't we talk about this with President Barack Obama? Yeah, we did. There was something about his birth certificate. And that caused me to go back and revisit what happened with Barack Obama's birth certificate. Now, I really hadn't followed this story. This is really kind of new information to me. But, the corruption has become so crazy that I think it's causing people to rethink what they've heard in the past. The media, it turns out the media has been lying to us for some time, and none of us knew it. So, I went back and I started just reading everything that I could about Obama's birth certificate. And it blew my mind. All of the stuff that I just didn't know. And I read everything I could. And there's so much information out there because there was all these court cases that happened. And so there's like affidavits and people have sworn statements. And then I looked at the actual document. And again, it just blew my mind because looking at the actual document, in my opinion, it's clearly a forgery. And so that's kind of my background, how I came. And, a couple of weeks ago, I produced a video on YouTube where I detailed, I kind of break down the birth certificate and why I believe it's a forgery. And so that's how I came to be, how this conversation started here. Do you want to give some of your background?
Sure, I'd love to. And that's fascinating what you said. You may know this, but the Post and Email started publishing at the very end of August in 2009. I didn't found it. It was founded by a gentleman named John Charlton. He ran it for about 6 months and kind of gathered a staff together. I was interested in writing and doing some publishing because I always had liked to write. And so he kind of put together a group of us. And then after about 6 months, he said, this is taking too much of my time. He says, I'm writing a book. I'm doing all these things. I'm neglecting my job. He said, I've got to hand this off to someone else. And somehow I became that someone else. And then everybody else who was on the informal staff we had at the time kind of just beat feet. And so it left it to me. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll try this. I always like to write. I didn't know how to run a WordPress site. I knew nothing about really anything with WordPress or any of the other systems either that were used out there at the time, Blogspot. And now it's mostly WordPress, I guess, but I didn't know anything about it. So, and in some ways, I'm still a novice running the website. I need a lot of help. But at any rate, the fascinating thing about it was being able to just write something and push a button and get it out. And then you had another thought, you came across another piece of research or information, you put it together, you do the best you can, you proofread and you press the publish button and you put it out there and people will come and read. It's been a long time and yet it hasn't, because we're talking 2009, August, and here we are 2024 and everybody's 14 and a half, almost 15 years older. And I'm like, how long have I been doing this? But it seems like it just went by in a flash. Because as you said, there's so much corruption in government. It doesn't almost matter who's in office. There's corruption underneath in the DOJ, in the FBI. It's astounding, the level of corruption. And of course, when the birth certificate thing came along, it was particularly of heightened interest to my audience, which already was really suspecting that there were some eligibility issues with Barack Obama and with John McCain, the late John McCain, and with others, Lowell Weicker, governor of my state, former governor, he's since passed. But there was a question about him being born in France. He had sort of launched an exploratory committee for president and didn't go any farther with it, as it turned out. But there have been many others. Former Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Ted Cruz. They all have situations where it was in question, are they what the founders would have considered to be a natural born citizen? Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5. And that has been, I'm so sorry. That has been the major issue that my paper has covered is what is a natural born citizen? What did the framers mean? And are there people posing as natural born citizens who know they aren't, or who may not even want to delve into that issue? And we're going through that now with Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy. In fact, both have disclosed their parents were not born in the country, nor were they naturalized U.S. citizens. Many people believe that the framers intended natural born citizen, that term, to mean born in the country to two U.S. citizen parents. Some say, well, it was just the father, because when the mother married the father, even if she was of another nationality, she became an American citizen, which was the way it was back then. So there are nuances to this. There is another camp. Of course, they believe Obama was eligible. And what they say is, well, as long as you're just born somewhere in the United States, you're fine. And then there are questions about American Samoa with Tulsi Gabbard. She was born there, and that was a territory, but it was an unincorporated territory. And then it's kind of like, well, does that qualify? There are lots of nuances, but we've had many in sort of big government figures writing and saying, well, of course the framers would have intended that someone like Barack Obama or John McCain or Nikki Haley, let's say, they didn't write it about her at the time, but of course they're eligible. Well, do we really know what the framers meant? And there are clues as to what they meant. So there was that question, and nobody wanted to touch that. Then that acted as a springboard into the so-called birth certificate. And that was when the investigation was launched by the cold case posse. Mike Zullo was the head of that, with Sheriff Arpaio sanctioning it. And they did a 5+ year investigation and found, as you did, that this is a so-called computer generated forgery. And it's just never gone away. And it doesn't matter what the mainstream media does and how many times they just throw out there, oh, Barack Obama released his birth certificate and it's absolutely genuine. Did they do their own investigation? Did they go to Hawaii? Did they get the answers? Did they do the FOIAs? Did they get any documents in response? And why were there so many inconsistencies with Hawaii officials at that time? We've written about it. We've covered all that. And we have also covered some of the issues with Trump and what appear to some to be selective prosecutions and politically motivated prosecutions and persecutions. So we're into all kinds of government corruption, but my audience is the most delved into the natural born citizen question. So that's still a burning question, and we can't really ask the founders what they meant, but we're trying to glean from historical references and documents what they did mean. And many of my readers believe they know.
Yeah, can I just clarify your personal opinion on the matter? So if you had to say, what level of confidence do you have that that document, the long form birth certificate of Barack Obama, is a forgery? Are you 50% confident, 75% confident? What's your position?
I am 100% confident it's a forgery, and I'll tell you why. I would never have been able to have done the gumshoe kind of operation that Mike Zullo carried out under Sheriff Arpaio's guidance and authorization. I don't have that background. Mike Zullo was a detective, and he was a police detective, and he was also a private investigator for a while. So I would not have been able to do that, but I rely on his conclusions and those of the two forensic companies he had, or entities, I should say, because one of them was the sole practitioner, but he had one in Hawaii and one in Italy, analyze this thing without any knowledge of the other doing it. And they came to pretty much the same conclusion, maybe expressed a little bit differently, but they worked in different disciplines in the world of forensics, which I don't know a whole lot about, but I could never have done that. And when he gave that press conference, December 15th, 2016, and he said, this is what we found, but not only did we find it, these two forensic analysts found it. And they said, there is absolutely no way these items on these birth certificates, comparing one to one that really existed, Obama's to one that really existed, they said there is no way in any way, shape, or form this could have happened, that these items line up exactly. And you touched on that in your video. You did a good job with that.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. My position is that that document is 100% a forgery. And, and I just started looking into this, but you can see it with your own eyes. If you just look at the document, and, if you want to see if the viewers want to go and watch my video, I break it all down for you. But just by looking at the document, you can see that the document curves as if it was copied, but the words don't curve along with the page. So the words were obviously placed there by a computer generated program. I mean, you can see if you're looking for it, you can see with your eyes that it's a forgery.
And why the media is trying to just thrust this, or they did, that's past tense really, but why they did this, and they thought that people would just buy it basically and accept it. And I had a recent conversation with Mike, as you know, and wrote about your video. And what he said is that he said, Sharon, and it's quoted in there, he said, this was the beginning of the media basically just trying to whitewash something. He calls it, there's a term for it. Why can't I remember? Gaslighting, of course.
Yeah.
And the gaslighting has continued to this day on different types of things. The Russia investigation, what Trump would call Russia, the hoax. All these other things, the impeachment, the fact that the first impeachment, he was basically being accused of almost colluding with Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, in kind of a get Biden type of a thing. You know, I'm asking you to investigate, and yet, oh, well, you're not supposed to do that. That's grounds for impeachment. And Trump was just asking, he says, can you look into whether or not there was corruption in Ukraine with the Bidens, with the son and the father, one or the other or both? And I don't see that that's a criminal thing. But this became a whole basis for impeachment. And now what are we seeing? That there was something going on in Ukraine with the Bidens. I mean, so the level of corruption in government is absolutely breathtaking. It's absolutely breathtaking. And so I do believe it's a forgery because I believe in Mike and the investigation. I've talked to him hundreds of times probably and quoted him many times from those interviews. And they are positive this is a computer generated forgery. And what's astounding is that no one in the media or anyone will take notice. And the FBI insists that there's absolutely no problem. I have an article written on that where someone queried them and they said there's nothing illegal about his presidency. He was born in Hawaii. That's all it takes. So they kind of relied on that. So there's sort of a nexus between the esoteric quest to find out what the founders meant about natural born citizen and this, oh, well, Obama was legit. No problem. Nothing illegal about his presidency. He's a natural born citizen because he was born here. But how do we know he was born here? What is that birth certificate image? Because it's not a real birth certificate. What is that covering? Why did they put that out there? And how could the FBI and the DOJ let this go? But that just shows the level of corruption there is there.
Yeah, I'd have to say about the part about the media. I think that they were obviously they were covering it up, but I think they were largely successful in covering up because of just going from my own experience. I remember back when this first came an issue. I remember Trump's press conference when he flew in on the helicopter and he came down and Obama had just released the long form birth certificate. And Trump gave that news conference and says, I congratulate myself because I made him do this. And once he gave that press conference, I let the whole thing drop. I just moved on to other things. I mean, we're all busy in our lives and, there's other things going on. President Trump won the next election. And so, I think I'm like an example of what most people did. The news media told us there's nothing here. President Trump gave his press conference. I just let it drop and I didn't even pay attention to the story anymore. Until now, when I'm going back and saying, wait a minute, what actually happened here? And I hope that more people start thinking about it in that same way and waking up to what had actually happened.
Yeah, it really is astounding when you think about the ramifications. There must have been a reason why that image was released the way it was. And in my interviews with Mike, including this last one, where he said, don't forget, there were reporters there. There was one reporter at a press conference that was off the record. Everybody was told, no recording devices, don't take notes. We're going to be watching you. Just come, you can come in. It was right before the image was released, April 27th, 2011. It was a Wednesday, and it was about mid to late morning, I remember. But these reporters were all in a sort of a group, you could say. And it was Robert Bauer, then White House counsel. He left shortly thereafter. But he was White House counsel then. And he basically said, here's his birth certificate. And he held up a PDF copy on a piece of paper. And the reporter, and we get this from a very good source, the reporter said, well, you still haven't released his real birth certificate. You've got an image on a piece of white paper that you're holding and showing to us, but where is the actual birth certificate? And he never got an answer. And then shortly thereafter, that was adjourned, and then Obama released this. But one thing Mike Zullo has brought up at many times is that Obama never held it in his hand. When he actually stood there at the podium and gave the press conference, he actually never said, this is my birth certificate right here. It's got my name on it. It has my parents' name, the hospital where I was born in Hawaii, Kapiolani. It's got all of these details. This is mine. I take ownership of this. This is authentic or whatever. Maybe he didn't want to say this, but the thing is, he never held it up. And Mike believes that that leads to what they call plausible deniability.
Yeah.
And this is all, there's got to be something they're hiding. And they hid everything with the Russia investigation, and they hid everything with the impeachments. And whoever heard of impeaching someone over a phone call when the other party wasn't even complaining? Zelensky said, I didn't feel any pressure, or nobody's complaining. Nothing went to the International Criminal Court. Or this is absolutely outrageous, the level to which people have gone to hide things or make up things, fabricate, talk about fabricating. And they make up this fabricated image and they expect Americans to buy it. Well, unfortunately, many Americans did believe they believed it was authentic at that point. And I'm not a document examiner. I don't have that kind of knowledge. But of course, there were questions because things didn't line up. They didn't seem to add up, different kinds of fonts and typefaces and things like that, just those basic things. And someone came out, in fact, the night that it was released, I think it was the same night, April 27, 2011. He was a young man working at a Colorado TV station, a local one, on the air, not just internet. And I remember I got a hold of him a couple of days later and was able to interview him. And he was straightforward. He says, I'm an independent politically. I don't lean either way. Fine. But he said, this is obviously a forgery. Now, we never heard anything more from him that I know of, but he was very, very clear about what he said. He was a document examiner. He was somebody with a background, and who the station had pulled him in. I should make that clear. He wasn't like a newscaster or anything, but they pulled him in and he said, this is a forgery. But voices like his are few, or were and are few and far between. And then even media that you might consider to be fairly friendly to this or open to at least hearing, Judge Jeanine Pirro, at one point, she had Sheriff Arpaio on after he left office, and he mentioned the birth certificate. And I remember her saying, I have a story written about it, and hopefully still linked to the video as long as they have it up. And she says, but that's all been resolved. And he said, no, nothing's been resolved with that birth certificate. And so why they insist on brushing this under the rug? Well, actually, Mike has a clue to that. He said media was threatened. He had people come to him with sworn affidavits early on, and they said, we were told that if we write any more about this, because they did start writing on it. Some people in Chicago and a couple of reporters, and they did start to write on it. And they were told by someone silently somewhere, or maybe not so silently, but it was enough to scare them. And from what he said at the very beginning, he said a couple of reporters even left the country permanently. They were so frightened.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, I can look up those old stories if you, I can send you links or whatever later. But it's really the level of threat and menace that people received as a result of this. And I got my death threats and all of that stuff. I got blank checks through the mail and things like that, which I don't really consider a threat. More like, you thought I was going to give you some money and there's no amount on it, something stupid like that. But I did get quite a few death threats and things like that in the beginning, which I ignored, but I did report them to the police. So, but it's really ridiculous. Why are people going to these lengths to cover up something like this? And it continues to this day, and it's wrong.
Yeah, and it gets really dark as well, because once you say that this document is 100% for a forgery, then you start to think, what are the implications of that? What does that mean?
Yes.
And
yes.
It's really dark. That means that
yes.
Obama knew that that document was a fake and went in front of the American people and said, this document is real. That also means that the leadership in Hawaii, the head of the health department, the governor of Hawaii, were also involved in the cover-up. They had to have known that that document was a forgery, that they didn't create it. So who created it? Who was involved in the cover-up? And obviously the something happened with the media, because it's insane that no newspaper reporter did not look at this document and see that it was a forgery. Right. So if Obama's involved, Hawaii's involved, the media's involved, that's really pretty dark.
Yes, exactly. And Mike has spoken about that many times on radio broadcasts, in interviews, and he brings it up constantly, really, that this joining at the hip, if you will, between the media and government and elected officials, who really are government, perhaps on a closer level to the people. But why is it they all conspired and it became taboo to even ask a question? You couldn't submit a UIPA request, which in Hawaii, that's their Uniform Information Practices Act. It's like their FOIA. They finally just admitted, and we got people in my audience, in my reading audience, submitted UIPA requests that actually got these Hawaii Department of Health officials going back and forth on email talking about, well, I'm not going to answer that one, or that one doesn't dignify a response, or, oh, let's just say no to all of it. Someone got that. I was surprised that they were actually released, but they just kept this wall, but it makes no sense. And as Mike pointed out in the last interview, why was Governor Abercrombie, he was then Hawaii governor, why was he unable to find this? He scurried around. He says, I'm going to find this, and then suddenly he can't find it. But Dr. Fukino, who was the health department director for quite a while, said, oh yeah, it's right in the file. And then
that was years, correct? That was years that he couldn't find it.
Yes, right. He says it's somewhere in the archives. There's something written down, he said. And the Honolulu Advertiser reported on all of this. And of course, if you look for those articles today, you probably won't find them. But yeah, he could not find it. And yet Dr. Fukino says, well, it's right in the bound volume. I've seen it. And then, I don't know if you know this was my last article. Mike had reminded me of this, that Dr. Alvin Onaka, who's the registrar, I believe he still is the registrar. He went to an international conference in I believe it was 2015. It's linked in the article. And they were talking about birth records, just kind of globally, if you will. And he mentioned Barack Obama's birth certificate. And he said, now, for instance, it's on page such and such, volume such and such of a bound book in the Hawaii Department of Health. Well, then why couldn't Governor Abercrombie find it? I guess Onaka had forgotten about that. I had an interesting exchange with Onaka, and it's in one of my stories. It's from way back. I was astounded that he even answered me, because I'm sure he had some kind of an inkling of what I was about and the newspaper I ran and everything, because we had submitted many, many requests and most of them went unanswered. But I was shocked, and suddenly they've got information, and it wasn't that particular information that he gave out at the conference, but it was kind of like, I would have to go back and review the article and remember what it was. It was a while ago, but why was it that suddenly he discloses things like this? So it wasn't the first time at that international conference. So suddenly somebody has information, but for years they wouldn't answer anybody. And they were like, well, no, we can't answer that. It's personal information. And why was it that UPI reported him as born at Queens Hospital? And then suddenly, they made a correction. And they said, we were wrong. They did announce the correction, as they should, but they said, no, it's Kapiolani. We made a mistake. Well, how did you make a mistake? I mean, how do you make a mistake about where someone's born, especially a president? None of this adds up. And someday, I really do think this is going to come out. And Mike suggested that in the last interview. He suggested that he thinks perhaps this is all going to come to a head also. We hope sooner than later.
Yeah, something that's also very troubling for me when you start to think about this is the court cases. So when you go back, there were I want to say like 40 court cases of challenging Obama's birth certificate.
Yes, yes, it
So,
was something like that.
yeah, there's a lot of court cases that people brought from in different states all over the place saying there's something wrong here. And not a single judge would take up any of these cases. And so when you're looking at what's happening to our court system today, where it's this, kangaroo courts and, two-tiered system of justice, all of that started back when the birth certificate started, because
Yes,
here we had all of these court cases, multiple court cases. And when you look at the documents that they had going into those court cases, there's obvious evidence that massive government fraud is going on.
yes.
And not a single judge would pick up any of those cases. That is a horrible miscarriage of justice against the American people. And I think what we're seeing now in the court system started back then when we had all of this evidence. And what's supposed to happen in a society is when you have evidence of fraud, the courts are supposed to be someplace you can take that to and adjudicate that in open court and figure out what the truth is. And that was denied to the American people.
Absolutely. And that's what's at the crux of all of this, because in a larger context, it's almost as if, and maybe this really is, the country is falling apart. We're coming apart at the seams, basically, because that whole underpinnings, that whole sense of I can go to court and hopefully get justice. Somebody might get something wrong. There may be a mistake made. There might be a misunderstanding or a misjudgment, but you hope to go to court and get your day in court, so to speak, and get justice. And now, why are we running these courts? What's the purpose of these courts if they're all politically motivated? Why did the Colorado Supreme Court rule it was 4-3? Why did they feel they even had the authority to issue that opinion? Are they the ones now who decide what an insurrection, quote unquote, is? And moreover, why didn't they look at the birth certificate of Barack Obama or the birth circumstances of John McCain or anyone else? And yet years ago, back in, it was the late 60s, I think, someone ran in California, maybe more than one, and there was more than one. One was only 33 years old. And the Secretary of State then, and I can't remember the exact names, but she looked at this and she said to the woman, you're not going to be 35 even by the time you're sworn in if you should win. But so in other words, you can't run. It's not as though you're 34 and a half now and it's a year before the election and okay, you're not old enough to run. So she struck her from the ballot. And there have been other instances where people have been taken off the ballot for lack of eligibility. More recently, in I believe it was 2016, there was a guy named Sal Mohammed who filed to run. And I don't know if it was just in New Hampshire, but this came up in New Hampshire. And the Secretary of State, it was a gentleman at the time. I don't know if he's a Gardner, I think his name was. But he looked at that and he said, you weren't born in the United States. So you're not a natural born citizen, so you can't run. And I think he sued over it and the courts went against him. They said, you have to be born here. But the whole thing is it is kind of a vague argument to some people because they say, well, look, natural born citizen just means you're born here. But now let's say you're born to 2 illegal aliens. Let's say you're born to 2 Islamic terrorists, and yet you want to run for US president. Is that what the framers would have wanted? Is that what they intended when they used this term? And why is this term used? It's reserved only for the commander in chief and president of the United States, only for that person. Well, with the exception of the 12th Amendment coming along in 1804, and then that brought the vice president in because it said the vice president must meet all the qualifications that the president has to. So now it's both of them, which I think is probably an excellent thing. But is this what the framers would have intended? They wanted a higher bar rather than a lower bar to the exclusion of foreign influence. And as that relates to Obama, he's already saying his father was never a U.S. citizen. So even if he was born in Hawaii, and the mother being a U.S. citizen, if we can presume all that, what about the father not being a citizen? There's still that question. So there are lots of questions about Obama. And now we see what's going on with a lot of other things that seem to spring from his presidency or pseudo presidency, whatever you want to call it. And it's kind of like, what is going on? What took root back when he became president that things seem to be falling apart so badly with the courts, as you mentioned, and the rule of law and all these other things, police and crime? And why do things not seem right? Because I know out in the community, there isn't a person you can speak to who doesn't agree that there is something horribly wrong with our society right now, not to mention all the cultural things. But I think those spring from what's been going on politically and who is conducting some kind of machinations that we can't see. I mean, I'd love to know an answer to that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the vice president. Are you aware of anything related to Kamala Harris as being a natural born citizen?
Yes, we've done a lot of work on that. And when I say we, it's mostly my readers. There is someone with an interesting Twitter, which is now X handle, goes by the @ sign, cancel Kamala. And he also uses Kamala cancel. And it's cancel with a K, just in case you go looking.
Yeah.
And this person, I don't know if it's male or female. I have no idea who this person is, really. But this person has done a tremendous amount of research through FOIAs and has actually gotten government documentation. And what he discovered is that Kamala had a younger sister. We all know that. And they were taken to Canada by the mother. She had since divorced. She had divorced the father a couple of years before. The father was a Jamaican citizen and reportedly naturalized. He does not give the year. It's a Stanford University bio, and he's a professor emeritus because he no longer is there. He retired from that. But the last I knew, they said that he was an advisor to the Jamaican government. So you're a citizen of Jamaica. Let's say he did naturalize. Was your allegiance fully to the United States at that point? Now, the girls were already born. And that's the argument. And the mother, from what Cancel Kamala seems to have found, and no one else has found anything furthering this, showing anything different, the mother never became a U.S. citizen. So, but even if they become U.S. citizens after the fact, that's probably not what the founders had in mind either.
Yeah.
I think they had in mind, I think they wanted two generations. They wanted the parents to be citizens. Now, that could have meant you fought the revolution. You were with the 3% who said, we don't want Great Britain anymore. We'll do anything we can to get under to get out from under their rule. If you were with that 3%, then the founders would have considered you a U.S. citizen at the end of the revolution. Of course, if you made it, if you survived. If you didn't, if you were one of these people who said, we're perfectly happy with British rule, or maybe we're just going to go sail back to Britain and just live there, or go to the West Indies or someplace else, we're not going to have anything to do with this revolution, well, then you weren't a U.S. citizen. So a lot of my readers and a lot of research shows that President Martin Van Buren was actually the first so-called, I mean, the way the founders would have intended, natural born citizen, because his parents were part of that generation that fought the revolution, and they were in with those people. And so then he was born on U.S. soil. That, we believe, it was what the founders intended, because when John Jay wrote to George Washington on July 25th, 1787, during the Constitutional Convention, he said, permit me to hint. And then he went on to say, I don't have the exact words in front of me, I should have it memorized at this point, but he said, we don't want foreign influence in the office of the president. And the commander of the American Army, American was not capitalized at that time, but he said the command in chief of the American Army and the president, we don't want any foreign influence. He said, permit me to hint that only a natural born, and he underlined the word born, citizen should have the privilege of this position, basically. And it wasn't resolved for anyone else. So why is the media and why is everyone in government saying, well, if you're born here, that's good enough. It doesn't matter if your parents were illegal aliens or even foreign diplomats. Their children, if born here, they're serving another country, but they're here. They are not supposed to be considered U.S. citizens. And in most cases, they're not. But I read a story by a very good source a few years ago stating, I think it was by Todd Bensman, who was a reporter down in Texas, and now he's with the it's a group that does immigration. But he wrote a story, and he said through his research, many even foreign-born children of diplomats are being given U.S. Social Security numbers when they're born. So why is this? Why have we clouded U.S. citizenship to the point where now almost anybody can waltz in and you're considered a U.S. citizen?
Yeah, this is so crazy to me because it seems like so many of our leaders, so many of our politicians have this kind of like globalist upbringing where they were born in different countries or their parents are from different
Yes.
countries. And for someone like me, who was born in America, my parents were born in America, my grandparents were born in America, it just seems like there should be a lot of people like that who have, American heritage, American
Yes.
lineages. Why aren't people with American lineages being promoted as our leaders? Why do we have all these leaders who have these globalist histories and backgrounds and families?
Yes, exactly. This is called your garden variety American, your garden variety natural born citizen, basically. Most people in this country, the majority, are like you. And if their grandparents weren't born here, at least their parents were. So they were U.S. citizens, and their parents came legally. They came through Ellis Island or whatever. It was all legal and documented. But it's true, there is an awful lot of foreign influence. And we found out about a few months ago about this Iranian operative who may have, as they said in quotes, influenced Biden's Iran policy. Well, of course. But why are these people there? Why are there so many layers of these people at the Justice Department? The FBI, I don't know. There are many federal judges who were not born here. Judge Chutkan, who is she is presiding over Trump's January 6th case in D.C., was not born here. I have not verified, but I read that her parents were very active socialist, communist type activists in, where was she from? Jamaica. Yeah, not Cuba. I was thinking Cuba. It was not Cuba. It was Jamaica. Because there's a lot of socialism down there. There's a lot of that. And so it makes you wonder, why are these people becoming federal judges? She's an Obama appointee. Why so much foreign influence? Obama, I remember when he was in the White House, he very much favored this international stuff and people from other countries. I'm not saying those people are bad people, but they live in their countries and we live in ours. And if we're going to preserve any form of constitutional governance, it's important that we be American. And people coming here to immigrate were expected to assimilate. And they're no longer expected to do that. Now we speak all their languages, and whether it's Mandarin Chinese or any other African dialect, we're all supposed to find interpreters for these people and coddle them and say, okay, yeah, you can stay and you're fine. Everybody can come. And that's not why we have immigration law. So it's a breakdown on many, many fronts, if only to say the rule of law that many of them tend to say, well, this needs to be upheld. No one's above the law. Well, aren't you basically breaking the law by bringing all these people in? They don't have to go through any vetting. They don't even have to go to an asylum hearing because they're given a date 5 or 6 or 10 years in the future. Is this the way you run a country? And it's being done by people who love this idea of bringing everybody and anybody in.
Yeah, it seems like there's so many policies in America today that favor foreign nations above the US.
Yes.
And I think it's this extension of this globalist idea of, maybe it's influenced by leaders who have this like globalist backgrounds or whatever, but it seems like all of our leaders are putting the rest of the world first over the interests of the people who live here. And you can look at, how our leaders deal with China and have all these pro-China policies. You can look at the immigration problems with everybody flooding across the border. You can look at just all of the money that, when we are horribly in debt, we give so much money to all other countries around the world. And You can look at TikTok. We have this app on all of our phones that our teenagers are addicted to, and it's owned by China. China controls the algorithms on that device. And it's crazy to me that that hasn't been stopped.
Yes, yes. And there are even advertisements that you can see on cable news stations that talk about how wonderful, just how absolutely glorious TikTok is, and why they depend on it, why they love it, why it's great for their brand, whatever it is they're marketing. And this is a very, very dangerous thing. I mean, I can't imagine a parent who wouldn't be concerned if communist China had their children's personal information, but I don't think they believe China does have it, but I think they do have it. But I don't know why they don't take that seriously. Because I think if they did, I think they would be alarmed, and we should take these things seriously. But yes, the level of corruption, and as you mentioned, you're absolutely right. If you're in business, which you obviously are, you can't do business unless we have a legal and a justice system that really works. And this is a very frightening thing, that it looks as though we are losing or have lost that. What do we do to return to, as others say, the rule of law? Why have we abandoned that? Or has it been abandoned only for certain people? That's not the way it's supposed to be. And we just can't have that. We can't say we're a free country if that's the system we have.
Absolutely.
So it tends to be a scary thought. I think it's frightening, and my feeling is we have to keep exposing it. Even if that's all we can do as writers, or you do more than that. You do video, and I was just watching your January 6th video before we had to sign on here, and I've seen some of that video, not nearly all of it, but it is rather interesting that people were being escorted through the Capitol. That leads to that question. Okay, what was going on there? Were the police, as you showed in your video, they were beckoning to people to come in? And yet the story is that there was an insurrection. Yes, some people did damage and shouldn't have done that. That's absolutely true. But a lot of people did a lot of damage during the summer of 2020 all over America's cities. And some towns too, but mainly the large cities, Seattle and Portland and these places. And nothing was done to most of those people. So there's your two-tiered system of justice. And it's daunting and it's frightening, but we can't allow fear to overtake us and to get us to stop. We have to keep at least exposing it and talking about it. And maybe it'll get some people thinking.
Absolutely. Let me just, because we're getting toward the end here.
Sure.
Let me just make sure, if people want to find your website to find out, and I've read a bunch of your articles and they're amazing. You do a really good job.
Well, thank you.
So, and I highly recommend people check out your website. Where do they go to find you?
Well, thanks for asking. It's www.thepostemail.com. That's THEPOSTEMAIL.com. Anyone can reach me at editor@thepostemail.com. We are on X as the Post Email. We have a Facebook page. I don't use it a lot. I got away from it when I realized how high level the surveillance was, and also the interference in the 2020 election with the Zuckerbucks and all of that. That did not wash with me. It certainly didn't sound as though it was an ethical thing to do. But so I use Facebook very guardedly and very limited. I use X more. I'm on Truth Social under the Post Email. And we write and publish every day. There's a daily newsletter people can sign up for on the homepage. It's right at the top. And it says, if you'd like to sign up, just click here. It's free. There's never a charge for that. And there's no paywall or subscription fee ever. We were able to get rid of that a long time ago, almost 10 years ago now. I did have a paywall for a while, but it's worked out much, much better to be free and open to all. And we just hope to be continuing to publish as long as possible about government corruption, and hope that we can make even a slight little bit of difference and make things better so we have a government that serves the people.
Yeah, I try to encourage people because, we all know that there's massive censorship going on all these social media sites. So
Yes.
I try to encourage people to find websites like yours, that is independent media, that is not being influenced by this weird media, mainstream media narrative. So I encourage people to find websites like yours and go directly to the websites. Don't rely on social media and what your feed is giving you. You have to find these independent websites that you can go to and do your own research, do your own reading, sign up for their newsletter. And I have a number of these like independent news websites that I follow, and I read, and it gives you a way to stay up on this information and know that you're not being influenced by social media algorithms and the mainstream media narrative, and hopefully get to the truth.
Absolutely. Well, I think you said it right there, Zach. The truth is what we're after. It may not be comfortable. It may be extremely uncomfortable. It may make a lot of people squeamish. But today, it seems as though getting to the truth in and of itself is a sin. You're not supposed to dig. You're not supposed to look. You're supposed to accept the censorship that you mentioned. That's a very important part of everything that's going on. The First Amendment is being absolutely eviscerated as we speak. But we're going to keep speaking and maybe try to turn this back a little bit. But this is something that has to be held as something very valuable. And we've got to exercise that free speech and not just give in and just say, okay, I'm vanquished. I won't try to speak out anymore. We have got to get back what we've lost. And that means unpopular speech and things that make people uncomfortable. That's just the way it is. And if the birth certificate's a forgery, then everybody in the world needs to know that. And if we're wrong, if Mike Zullo's research is wrong, which I don't think it is, but if it were to be wrong, well, then okay, then we need to know that. But why can't we just have the truth and the facts, and let's stop all of this prevaricating and all of this other stuff? Why has America become a country where the truth is no longer popular? We need to restore it to popularity, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely well said. All right. Well, yeah, let's wrap it up. And I just want to say thank you. And I really appreciate having this conversation. This was really insightful, and I appreciate the conversation. Hopefully, maybe we can do this again in the future.
I hope so, Zach. Thank you so much. And when I get your link from the video, I'll write about it and post it on my site as well.
Awesome. Fantastic.
Thank you so
well,
much.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.